Atlanta International Airport was alive with its usual chaos that morning. Families zigzagged through terminals, dragging overstuffed suitcases behind them. Sleepy travelers off red-eye flights shuffled with dazed expressions. Business people strutted by with earbuds in, lost in their own corporate bubbles. Everything felt routine until the bark shattered it all. It wasn't an ordinary bark. It rang out sharp and commanding from deep within Terminal 4. It reverberated like a fire alarm, raw, urgent, and impossible to ignore. The sound cut through the crowd, halting motion, like a spell had been cast. The source was Ranger, a Belgian Malinois, who had jerked taut on his lead. His handler, Officer Daniel Carter, immediately halted. Ranger was experienced. He didn't bark without reason. In fact, Carter trusted that dog's instincts more than any scanner or ID document. Ranger wasn't just trained to detect bombs or drugs. He picked up on something far more elusive: fear, stress, deceit. "What is it, boy?" Carter asked, his voice low, eyes narrowing in the direction Ranger was staring. There across the terminal, a man in a sharp navy suit stood out. Polished leather shoes, rimless glasses, and a sleek briefcase. Every detail screamed professionalism. Beside him was a little boy, no more than 5. Light brown hair, oversized cartoon t-shirt, and a well-loved teddy bear, hugged tightly to his chest, like a lifeline. Ranger wouldn't stop barking. "Excuse me, sir," Carter said as he approached. "Would you mind stepping aside for a moment?" The man turned calm and smiling. His English was precise, with a faint European lilt. "Is there a problem, officer? I'm Thomas Whitman, a U.S. citizen transiting through Atlanta with my adopted son. We're en route to Brussels." Before Carter could even ask, Whitman presented his and the boy's passports, neatly tucked in a leather holder. The documents were perfect visas, aligned custody papers issued by a court in Texas, everything in apparent order. The boy was listed as Ethan Whitman, but the child's behavior painted a different picture. He said nothing, not a single word. He didn't flinch when addressed by a nearby female officer, who knelt and smiled at him. He didn't even meet her eyes. "He's shy," Whitman offered smoothly. "He's had a difficult past. I'd rather we didn't pressure him." Something turned in Carter's stomach. Everything on paper checked out, but the air around them felt wrong. Ranger could sense it too. He didn't bark for paperwork. He barked when the truth hid beneath the surface. "For protocol," Carter said evenly, "I'll need you both to accompany us for a private screening." Whitman gave a slight nod and followed without protest. The boy remained silent, clutching his bear tighter as they walked. But it was what happened next that truly unsettled Carter. As they passed a mirrored wall, Carter noticed something chilling. Not once did Whitman glance at the boy. No reassuring hand, no protective body language. Nothing. He didn't look at him like a father. He looked at him like luggage. Back in the control room, Carter requested biometric verification and a run through European criminal databases. A red alert would flag any mismatch. Meanwhile, Ranger planted himself outside the inspection room like a statue, unmoving, eyes locked on the door. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Then a loud beep broke the quiet. Invalid child passport. The real name wasn't Ethan. It was Eli Marrow. Nationality French. Status missing reported by his mother, 73 days earlier. Carter closed his eyes and exhaled. Ranger hadn't been wrong, not this time, not ever. Inside the interrogation room, Carter sat across from Thomas Whitman, file folder open in his trembling hands. The man across from him sat with a kind of eerie calm. Hands folded, gaze steady, as if this was nothing more than an inconvenient business delay. He didn't ask questions. He didn't demand explanations. He simply checked his wristwatch, waiting for time to wash away the situation. The boy still hadn't spoken, still hadn't moved. "Let's go over this one more time," Carter said, voice tightening. "This child was reported missing from France. You're not listed in any official adoption records from Interpol or the EU. My lawyer will sort that out." Whitman replied coolly. "I have provisional custody through a court in Texas. Everything is legal. We're heading to Europe for medical treatment." The timeline didn't match. The boy's silence didn't match. Nothing matched. Carter called in Emily Hayes, a seasoned child social worker. She entered quietly, knelt beside the boy, and offered him a bottle of water. Then she slid over a piece of paper and some crayons. The boy, still mute, reached slowly for a crayon. He began to draw. First a dog, then a plane, then a tall figure with emotionless eyes and severe eyebrows. Emily leaned in gently. "Is this you?" she asked. He nodded barely. "And this man?" No response. "Is he your daddy?" The boy clutched the crayon so hard it snapped in his hand. He let it fall. Then in the softest voice he whispered a single word. No. That tiny word, no, hit like an explosion in the room. The silence that followed was louder than any alarm. Carter locked eyes with Emily. She stood slowly, her expression unreadable, but her eyes carried the weight of what they'd just heard. From the doorway, Ranger padded into the room and made his way over to the boy. No barking, no growling, just calm, deliberate steps. He sat beside the child and gently rested his snout on Eli's leg. And for the first time, the boy smiled. "Your name's Eli, isn't it?" Emily asked softly, crouching beside him. The boy nodded again. "Can you tell me where your mommy is?" He didn't look up. His eyes stayed on the floor. His voice was nearly a breath. "In Marseille. She told me, if I ever got lost, to say I was looking for her." That was all it took. Every piece of the puzzle snapped into place in Carter's mind. The passports were forged, the custody documents fake. This wasn't a legal adoption. It was an abduction planned and executed under the illusion of legitimacy. A cover story wrapped in paperwork. Thomas Whitman wasn't a father. He was a kidnapper. Hours later, his connecting flight was officially canceled. He was placed in custody, this time with handcuffs and armed escort. Still, he didn't flinch. His jaw was tight, lips pressed into a line, and a vein pulsed visibly in his temple. No rage, no panic, just controlled tension like a man whose plan had cracked and was trying to hold it together with willpower alone. In a quieter part of the facility, Eli slept in Emily's arms, Ranger curled protectively at his feet. The boy hadn't said much more, but his body language had changed. He wasn't shrinking away from contact. He wasn't frozen in fear. Something had shifted. Interpol was now involved. A red alert had gone out across Europe to locate Eli's mother. A team of child psychologists had been called in for immediate assessment. Officer Carter stood in the hallway outside the room and let out a slow breath. He looked down at Ranger, who finally seemed to relax. "You saw it before any of us did, didn't you, buddy?" he whispered, scratching behind the dog's ears. "You always do." Ranger wagged his tail just once, but in that single motion was all the confirmation Carter needed. Back at the FBI's child abduction unit, the case file on Thomas Whitman grew thicker with every passing hour. The room smelled like stale coffee and aging paperwork. Carter read quietly, his fingers skimming through lines of text and data. Thomas Robert Whitman, business consultant, private security advisor, clean criminal record, but multiple suspicious financial transfers between Luxembourg, Texas, and Dubai. This wasn't just a lone man with a fake passport. This was a man with resources, reach, and a deeply hidden agenda. Carter tapped the folder with a knuckle deep in thought. At his feet, Ranger lifted his head alert again. The case wasn't over, not by a long shot. Elsewhere in the building, Eli was sipping warm milk while drawing. Emily sat beside him, letting the silence do the work. It was in that stillness that Eli finally began to talk. "He told me my mommy died," Eli said quietly. "He said I had to go with him. That if I cried, the bad guys would come." Emily didn't interrupt. She simply listened. "Did you believe him?" she asked after a moment. Eli paused. Then he drew another picture, a teddy bear worn and patched. "No," he said softly, "because Mommy would never let me leave without my bear." That bear, the one Eli had clutched at the airport, was the only thing he'd brought with him from Marseille. It wasn't just a toy. It was a memory, a lifeline, a promise. Emily swallowed hard. Children, she thought, are often stronger than we realize, and they hold back far more than they ever should. Meanwhile, authorities in France had finally located Claire Marot, Eli's biological mother. She had filed a missing child report 73 days earlier. No one had helped her. She had no lawyer, no money, no voice anyone would listen to, just a mother's plea. But now it was different. Interpol arranged immediate emergency reunification. A charter flight was booked. Claire was on her way. At 3 p.m., Carter received the call. "The mother is alive. She's being flown in tonight." He closed his eyes. Something inside him finally eased. Ranger, sensing the change, rested his head on Carter's knee again. When Whitman was brought back for a second interrogation, he no longer wore the mask of polished control. His suit looked wrinkled. He was sweating. His posture sagged. "What were you planning to do with the child?" the prosecutor asked. Silence. Why the forged documents? Why lie? Whitman's jaw clenched. His voice, when it finally came, was low and strained. Because she didn't know what she was doing. Eli needed a real life. Structure, a future, not emotional chaos. And kidnapping was your solution. His silence spoke louder than words. He no longer looked like a businessman. He looked like what he was, a desperate manipulator clinging to the illusion of righteousness. That night, Claire landed at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. As soon as her eyes locked on the boy waiting across the room, she screamed his name. Eli, and he ran. The hug that followed was so raw, so powerful, that even the officers nearby wiped their eyes. Ranger watched silently from a few feet away, head tilted as if understanding something too deep for words. Through her tears, Claire whispered to Emily, "Thank you. Thank you for believing in me. In him." Emily nodded and smiled faintly. "We just followed the one who saw the truth before any of us did." She looked at Ranger. The case wasn't over. But that night, for the first time in over 2 months, a mother and child were together again. And it had all started with a bark that no one dared ignore. Dawn arrived gently at the Family Protection Center just outside Atlanta. Warm light poured through the tall windows, stretching across the tiled floors and illuminating a quiet room where Eli finally slept soundly, tucked safely in his mother's arms. Claire Morrow hadn't closed her eyes all night, but it wasn't from fear. It was awe. She couldn't stop staring at him. Her boy, alive, breathing, safe, pulled back from a nightmare she had screamed about for months, only to be ignored. And yet he was here. From the hallway, Officer Carter watched silently, a paper cup of cold coffee in hand. Ranger lay at his feet, finally relaxed. So much had happened in such a short span. Too much, too fast. "Would you like to go in?" a nurse whispered. Carter shook his head. "Not yet. Let them have this moment. Just the two of them." Ranger lifted his head briefly, ears flicking, then lowered them again, and resumed his peaceful vigil. He knew somehow the most urgent part of the mission was done. Later that morning, the U.S. Attorney's Office opened an official investigation. The scope of the case had widened dramatically. Multiple legal officials in Texas were now under review for enabling falsified documentation that supported Thomas Whitman's supposed custody. Seals, signatures, court orders, all fabricated with clinical precision. And Whitman hadn't been the only one to exploit the loopholes. At least 3 other children were now under review, adopted under similar suspicious circumstances. Some had been recovered. Others were still missing. This had become bigger than one abduction. It was a web of corruption stretching across borders, wrapped in the illusion of legality. But those were matters for the courts. For now, all Eli wanted was to play. In the sunny backyard of the family center, the little boy kicked a red ball across the grass. Ranger, off-leash and free, chased after it without hesitation. No commands, no expectations, just pure instinct and joy. Emily Hayes sat on the porch beside Claire, watching the unlikely pair in the sunshine. "I've never seen him like this," Claire said, her voice soft with wonder. "Before all this," he barely spoke, didn't laugh. He'd sleep with his eyes half open like he didn't feel safe even in his dreams. Emily didn't take her eyes off the boy. "He's not doing it for us." Claire turned. "What do you mean he's doing it for Ranger? That dog was the first one to earn his trust." Claire looked out across the yard again. Ranger sat obediently, tail-wagging, red ball in his mouth like a proud trophy. "What happens to him now?" she asked quietly. "Ranger. He's nearing retirement. After years of service, the department usually arranges adoption. Some officers already applied." Claire hesitated. Then, with a kind of certainty that left no room for doubt, she said, "What if we adopt him?" Emily blinked. "You want to? I don't just want to. I need to," Claire replied. "Eli doesn't feel safe without him. Honestly, neither do I. That dog didn't just find him. He brought him back to life. And me too." Emily nodded slowly. "I'll talk to the department. I'll see what I can do." That same afternoon, the district attorney's office held a brief but firm press conference. The spokesperson confirmed the arrest of Thomas Whitman and the beginning of legal proceedings against him for international kidnapping fraud and manipulation of public institutions. But for Officer Carter, the real headlines weren't on the news. They were outside, where a little boy laughed for the first time in 73 days. They were in. Claire holding her son close, with no fear of losing him again. And they were in Ranger, lying in the grass, eyes closed, breathing slow and steady, finally at ease. That night, Carter lingered at the center after hours, just him and Ranger sitting under the porch light. He rested a hand on the dog's back. "Sometimes protocol isn't enough, huh? Old friend," he murmured. "Sometimes it takes more than a badge. Takes heart, and a nose that refuses to be fooled." Ranger didn't respond. He didn't need to. He just wagged his tail, slow and sure. because he understood. There were still shadows left to uncover, but for now, there was peace. A mother and child slept safely, and the dog who had refused to be silent had changed their world. The federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta was packed, every seat taken. Yet not a sound moved through the chamber. Cameras were banned, but court microphones captured every breath, every pause, every declaration. At the back, under sterile white lights, sat Thomas Whitman, wrists cuffed, brow furrowed, posture stiff. The man who once carried himself like he was untouchable now looked small, powerless. At the front stood Claire Morrow. Her hair was pulled back neatly, hands steady despite the storm behind her eyes. Across from her, the man who had stolen her child. And beside her, Eli, small, quiet, his teddy bear held tightly in one hand, the other resting gently on Ranger's head. The dog lay at the boy's feet like a living shield. "Do you recognize these documents, Mr. Whitman?" the federal prosecutor asked, holding up a thick folder brimming with evidence. Whitman's voice was low, defiant. "I have nothing to declare." It was the third time he'd said that, and by now it no longer mattered. Every piece of his scheme had been exposed, every fake signature, every forged transfer, every manipulated official. But the real truth wasn't in the documents. It was in the people he tried to silence. The judge turned to Claire and granted her the floor. She stepped forward slowly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "For months," she began, "they told me I was hysterical, that I had no proof, that she motioned to Whitman, was a respected man, and I was just an emotional foreign mother." She glanced at her son, then back to the judge. "My child couldn't sleep, couldn't speak. He lived in fear, and no one listened. Not the courts, not the police. No one found him." She paused. "Except this dog." The courtroom didn't stir. No coughs, no whispers, just silence, thick with the weight of truth. "He barked when no one else did," Claire said. "He sensed what others refused to see." The prosecutor stepped forward again. "Your Honor, this case isn't just about one kidnapping. It's about a system that too often protects the powerful and ignores the vulnerable. Today, we have the chance to begin fixing that." 3 hours later, the verdict was delivered. Guilty. On all counts, international child abduction, falsification of legal documents, and institutional conspiracy. Bail was denied. Whitman was taken into custody immediately. Full custody of Eli was granted to Claire with strict protective measures to ensure he would never be threatened again. There were no cheers, just a deep, cleansing silence, the kind that doesn't weigh you down, but lifts something off your chest. Eli looked up at his mother and smiled. Ranger, as if sensing the moment, rose to his feet and walked to Claire's side. He rested his head gently against her leg. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed for quotes, flashes firing, microphones raised, but Claire and Eli said nothing. Instead, they stood quietly for a single, unplanned photograph. Mother, child, dog. No posed smiles, just truth. The next morning's headline summed it all up: "The dog who disobeyed and saved a child from disappearing forever." 1 month later, Ranger's official retirement ceremony was held at the Department of Justice in Atlanta. It was a small gathering, but not a dry-eyed one. He was awarded the Medal of Valor for his unmatched service and instinct. But the medal wasn't the most important document handed over that day. It was the adoption papers. Ranger was now legally part of the Morrow family. In their new home just outside the city, he slept beneath Eli's bedroom window. Sometimes the boy still woke in the night, shaken by echoes of the past, but hearing the soft breathing of the dog beside his bed always calmed him. Claire, too, had begun therapy not just to let go of the fear, but to reclaim her identity. Her voice grew stronger, her steps more sure. She was no longer the invisible woman no one believed. She had her son. She had her life back. And she had her dignity. One afternoon, Officer Carter stopped by for a visit. He found Ranger and Eli playing chase in the backyard. The boy laughed clear, unguarded, free. Claire poured lemonade from the porch. "I didn't think I'd ever see this much light again," Carter said, watching them. "Neither did I," Claire replied. "But here we are. A second chance for all of us." Ranger trotted up to Carter's tail, wagging. The officer knelt, wrapped his arms around him, and whispered, "Good boy. You did it again." Ranger, as always, said nothing. He didn't need to. It was a quiet Sunday morning. Sunlight filtered gently through linen curtains as Claire stood in the kitchen, preparing toast. The scent of butter and warm bread lingered in the air. Down the hallway, the sound of feet, small and fast, thudded against the hardwood floor. Captain Eli and his flying dog, a little voice called out. Eli, still in pajamas, raced through the living room with a superhero cape flapping behind him. Ranger, ever patient, trotted calmly ahead of him, tail wagging in time with Eli's giggles. The harness was gone. The commands were no more. And yet his mission was clearer than ever. Protect this child. His child with every fiber of his being. Out on the porch sat a flower pot, with a hand-painted sign. A four-legged hero lives here. That Sunday wasn't just any Sunday. Claire had been invited to speak at an International Child Protection Forum in Washington, D.C., her first public appearance since the ordeal. While a trusted neighbor looked after Eli, she boarded the plane alone, heart-pounding, not with fear, but with purpose. The auditorium was full. Judges, social workers, volunteers, therapists, prosecutors, every seat taken. The crowd hushed the moment Claire stepped onto the stage. She took a breath, steadied her voice, and began. I was alone, silenced, on the edge of giving up, until a dog barked. That single line stopped the room. That bark didn't just save my son, it saved me. Because when no one else believed me, he did. She looked across the room, rows of professionals, each one trained to protect and serve. I'm not just here to say thank you, she continued. I'm here to remind you that listening can save lives. Whether you're a teacher, a caseworker, a neighbor, or a dog, any one of us could be the thread that keeps someone from unraveling. And then she ended with words that landed deep in every heart. Surviving takes courage, but rebuilding, that's love. Weeks later, a letter arrived. No return address, postmarked from Texas. Just a single page handwritten in shaky script. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. You helped expose something far bigger. Your courage saved lives. Thank you. It was signed by a judge, one of the very same who had once dismissed her cries. Claire didn't need the apology, but it was proof that speaking up had mattered, that pushing back had been worth it. Back at home, Eli's nightmares had all but disappeared. He slept peacefully now, the bear in his arms, Ranger, curled up at the foot of his bed. He'd started drawing again, not the fearful scribbles from before, but joyful sketches full of light and color. And in every picture, two figures appeared, a boy and a dog. Sometimes with capes, always together. I want to be like Ranger when I grow up, Eli told his mom one night. Brave, she asked, brushing his hair from his eyes. He shook his head. No, someone who listens when no one else does. Claire bent down and pulled him into a hug. Then you're already just like him, she whispered. One crisp autumn afternoon, Carter visited again. This time he brought a photo album, a gift for Eli. They sat together on the porch like old friends, flipping through snapshots of the journey Eli at the family center. Ranger curled up under court benches, Claire holding her son outside the courthouse, laughter in his eyes. Sometimes I think it was a miracle, Carter said, staring at one photo, Eli hugging Ranger so tightly, the dog's tongue stuck out from under his chin. Claire smiled. It wasn't a miracle. She looked out at the yard where Eli and Ranger chased leaves. It was a dog who refused to obey an order, a man who chose to look beyond paperwork, and a little boy who never gave up hope that someone would come looking. Carter looked down, and Ranger wandered over, resting his head on the officer's knee. He closed his eyes, content. No one said anything. They didn't need to. That evening, Claire wrote in her journal. The words came naturally, easily, without fear. True heroism doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it walks beside us, on four legs. It hears the fear we won't say aloud. It stays when the world falls apart, and it gives us back the parts we thought we'd lost. She closed the notebook, leaned over, and kissed her sleeping son goodnight. Outside his door, Ranger lay curled, breathing softly. In that house now, fear no longer lived, because the dog who broke the silence had built something stronger in its place. Fall deepened. The trees outside the Morrow home turned shades of amber and fire, their leaves crunching under Eli's sneakers as he ran through the backyard, cape flying behind him. Ranger trotted at his side, loyal as ever, ears perked, eyes bright, with that quiet knowing. Their bond had only grown stronger, two survivors of the same storm, now finding joy in the aftermath. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the Department of Justice. Inside was a certificate framed in gold trim, in recognition of outstanding service and instinct in the protection of children and families. Ranger's name was written in bold across the top. He wasn't just a retired service dog now. He was a national hero. Later that week, a small ceremony was held at the family home. Just a few close friends, Officer Carter, Emily Hayes, a couple of agents who'd worked the case. No press, no noise, just warmth. Eli, beaming in a button-up shirt too big for him, stood beside Ranger, as Carter knelt and pinned a small silver badge to the dog's collar. "You earned this more than most officers ever do," Carter said, voice thick with emotion. Ranger gave a small huff and licked Eli's hand. The others laughed. It was perfect. That evening, Claire stood by the window looking out at her son chasing fireflies. Emily joined her sipping tea. "Do you ever think Emily asked about what would have happened if he hadn't barked that day?" Claire nodded. "Every night. It still wakes me sometimes." But then she said softly, "I remember that he did. And that's enough." Emily placed a hand on her shoulder. "It wasn't just Ranger. It was you. You never gave up." Claire didn't reply. She didn't need to. The next morning, as the sun rose behind the house, casting a golden hue across the dewy grass, Eli placed a new drawing on the fridge. A boy, a dog, and a cape. This time the boy was flying, not afraid, not running. And beside him, Ranger's sword, tail wagging ears, flapping like wings. "I made this for school," Eli said. "It's for Hero Day." Claire crouched beside him. "Do you think Ranger knows he's your hero?" she asked. "He knows," Eli said confidently, "but he's everyone's hero too." Later that month, Claire received another invitation, this one from an international advocacy group for child welfare. They wanted her to speak again, to share her story, to show that even in the most broken places, truth can be found, and it can bark. She accepted, and this time, she brought Eli and Ranger with her. As they walked onto the stage in Paris, a hush fell across the audience. The boy walked proudly hand in hand with his mom Ranger, by his side, tail held high. They stood not as victims, but as a family healed and whole. Claire began her speech the way she always did now. "This story doesn't start with me. It doesn't even start with my son. It starts with a dog who refused to stay quiet." Applause rippled across the room, not thunderous but steady, respectful, reverent, because everyone there understood. Sometimes the loudest truths are spoken by those who say nothing at all, and sometimes it takes one bark to wake the world. That night back in their hotel room, Eli fell asleep wrapped in his blanket, Ranger curled up beside him. Claire stepped out onto the balcony and looked at the stars. She thought of the journey, the pain, the doubt, the silence, and the one voice, wordless but certain, that had changed everything. In her journal she wrote, "The world nearly forgot him, but a dog remembered. And because of that, a mother got her son back. A boy found his voice. And a hero, with 4 paws, reminded us all that real justice sometimes has fur." She closed the book and smiled. Eli stirred behind her in bed, and in his sleep, reached out for Ranger. The dog didn't move. He was already there.